One of the finalists in the poetry category for this year's Minnesota Book Awards is Julie Gard's Home Studies. While an important aspect of her voice is being queer and female, this work transcends these categories and generates questions and considerations relevant to all.
But it's a privilege to have this much art going on in our community. Artists of all kinds with tremendous talent and generosity. Tonight here we celebrate one of these artists, Julie Gard. An associate professor of writing at UW-Superior, winner of multiple art grants, an MFA from the University of Minnesota, Julie Gard has 2 previous chapbooks and the full-length collection, Home Studies. The prose poem as a blended hybrid form, the poet and partner and daughter, family and community, poet and overlooked object. Julie's poems reveal these pushes and pulls of these shared spaces. Bring your hands together, push and pull for Julie Gard.
As you know, my name's Julie Gard. You can just call me Julie. My thesis was a collection of short stories and a novella, but I noticed some of my favorite stories in the bunch were really short. So I was starting to write in more compressed forms. And then I lived in Russia for a year, and in this city called Vladivostok, it's in the very far east. Anyway, when I was there, things were really chaotic and life was really crazy. And somehow, fiction, I still love reading fiction and I still sometimes write it bits and pieces, but real life was so much stranger than anything I could have made up, or just so much more fascinating and sometimes terrifying and interesting. And so I found myself going more into creative nonfiction and poetry, I'm returning to poetry, but I haven't ever really gone back to line breaks. It's very rare that I write anything with line breaks, even though I love a lot of poetry that has line breaks. So what I write tends to be this compressed, sort of hybrid writing, like in Scrap, that is, it's prose poetry. So it's poetry, but it's written more like prose, without the line breaks. The prose poem, I wrote as kind of around high school, college, I was doing more poetry, and then end of college, and then grad school, really more fiction. And so I think I loved writing fiction, but at a certain point it seemed like something about the shorter nature of the prose poem, or the more compressed nature, kind of spoke to me, being able to boil things down more. Maybe it feels in some ways like a way of having it all, kind of getting to tell a story and capture a moment, to kind of paraphrase Charles Simic, although he says that it's impossible in a way, you can't do both at once, but he does it really well. So I'll do some of my own writing at home, because to me my job space feels so much more about teaching and committees and maybe writing business stuff, but not usually generating or revising my own work. Everybody works differently. If you're a one project person, that's who you are, and go for it. It can work to have a few irons in the fire. So it's not for 8 or 10 years all I did was just think about this. I thought about this other project and this and that, and I was working on home studies and then working some more on this and sending this out and then doing that. And it's good to have a few different things going. And then when you get tired of one, you can work on the other. And yeah, and I have lots of time to write, which is really awesome. I guess I kind of operate somewhere in between that idea that, yes, you should write every day. Well, that's, I don't write every day, but I do try to really set aside, even if it's small pieces of time, to work on a regular basis. I think that's really important. Because it's amazing what, just a little here and a little there, it does add up. I do have a journal that I keep, so a lot of times I'll journal first, and then those will turn into prose poems. But sometimes if I've got kind of an idea in my head and want to just kind of see it as a prose poem right away, then I'll just go right to the computer. But usually I'll do some journaling and note-taking and kind of sketching out that way first. But then once I get into revising, then it's I want to see it as this block of text and really just keep reworking it from there. I found I really like to, I go to the Unitarian Universalist church here in town, and not like every week, but often. And I love to like take notes and kind of write. I swear I am really listening to like the talk or sermon or whatever, but it's just like a great space to also be thinking of ideas. So I have a lot of like just thinking of what I write on. A lot of times it's like programs, like Unitarian programs, and I just tape them in my journal, and it's kind of fun to look back at those. I have 2 Word documents with tables, and one is like each place I send workout, the date I've sent it, what I've sent, and then accepted or rejected. And sometimes you'll get a no, but a send again, which actually means something. So if someone says like, can't take this, but send again, I used to think that was just like, you're just being polite, like, but it's actually a different category. So there's like the no with no send again, which I also get sometimes. There's a no with send again, and then there's the yes. So no send agains they're not as good as yeses, but they're good. So I'm working on a project about attachment, which I became interested in, raising our daughter in attachment theory, and especially when somebody's had like disrupted attachment. But then I love to write off of like found objects, and so I'm writing about literally like things that attach. Like I wrote about a pen cap the other day because it attaches and it joins and separates, and I'm realizing a lot of things both join and separate, which somehow my mind, physical things do, which somehow my mind relates to sort of the more theoretical and emotional parts of the project, which are like autonomy and connection, like and relationship. Like you want to be free, but you want to be connected. You want to have long-term relationships in your life, romantic or otherwise, family, friends, but you also want to be independent and do your own thing. And so those subjects fascinate me. And just like the fragmentation, I started really seriously writing prose poems when Michelle and I were living in Russia for a year, actually the year we met our daughter, and something about just the fragmentation of the society there and what we saw around us, and a lot of danger, a lot of unpredictability, and somehow like the fiction project I was working on, and I love fiction, I love reading good fiction, and but the fiction project I was working on didn't feel right. Like the prose poems I was writing felt more like they were helping me get through things, these sort of fragmented bits of what was going on and what I was seeing versus fiction. It's more like what's been forgotten, like, oh, somebody forgot to care about that or notice it. Well, I've already mentioned how I love like found objects, right, and writing off of them. Louise Nevelson, I became interested in her artwork, in particular her like boxes. Like she does these basically found object, they're like wall sculptures, a lot of them, but they're kind of they're 3-dimensional at the same time, and they're like basically a series of crates with like all different sorts of things. And I just thought her work was really cool. How I first became interested in her, to actually answer your question, is that when I was living in the Twin Cities, they had a piece of hers out at it might have been like Sky Cloud, out at the Walker and Art Museum. And then there was also one at the Weissman Museum. And I forget the title of it right now, but it was really cool, awesome wall sculpture. And the Weissman was free to go to, and it was on campus at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. And so I would just like walk over there and hang out with it, And I think that's when I really became interested. And then it wasn't until years later that I embarked on this project, but I think it kind of came back to that. And realizing that I really love to write off of not only found objects, but visual artwork, and her work kind of filled both of those categories. So I just got into it, and it was like a good way too, in terms of thinking of like a schedule or like a writing routine. Like every morning I'll write off of a different sculpture, and I kind of got into that routine. So, I mean, there are other artists I could imagine writing about as well, or writing off of their artwork, and I have with other artists, but I think I was just really drawn to writing off of her work. And maybe it has somewhat too, like with my love of Slavic culture and her being from Ukraine. I think there may be just some different connections there. I certainly admire writers who work faster, but I think sometimes letting time pass and seeing how your work fits together is a good thing.
Be inspired to piece things together, whether that's like in your own life or creatively. I think that would be what I would most want people to take away.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming. It was just really, really wonderful to see you all.